about kind of why we feel like we need change in Raleigh at the General Assembly. And so what we're going to do is we're going to do just kind of a quick overview of what's happened in the last 2 years and why we feel so strongly change is so important. So Shane, if you can just kind of flip to the next slide. We're just going to go through this. Okay, so just as a recap about the last 2 years, we all know about COVID, but what we've also seen is we've also seen our constitutional rights time and time again, they have been compromised. So what we've really seen is we've seen the governor, he's ruled under a state of emergency for 732 days, which is 38% of his term, and this week he refused to lift that state of emergency. And I got that from the Charlotte News and Observer. You guys can read all that for yourself. So we continuously live in this state of emergency, even though by and large, everybody's kind of back to normal. Roy Cooper refuses to relinquish the powers that come from that state of emergency. All right, next slide. All right, and the North Carolina General Assembly, it's lacked the will, the ability, the creativity to stop him and protect freedom, liberty, and our constitutional rights. And so we're going to kind of see through, some of the details today on what they've done and what they've not done and why change is so important. All right, next slide. Okay, now I do want to give credit where credit is due, all right? So Tim Moore, he did try. He went ahead and he made a sign. So let's flip to the next slide. He tried to stop these emergency powers. You can see him here. He wrote a little sign, and he celebrated the 2-year anniversary of essentially emergency powers tyranny. And so this is posted on his Facebook page, and essentially that's about all he's been able to do to stop 2 years of executive power privileges and orders. Let's flip to the next slide. Okay, to date, Governor Cooper has issued 116 executive orders just on COVID-19 matters alone. You can go to this website right here. I can provide all this information if you would like it. But to this date, there have been 116 executive orders taking away your rights and liberties to date. All right, next slide. All right, so I want to take you guys down a trip down memory lane. 2 years goes by pretty darn quick, and now we're in this whole spirit of let's just forget about COVID, elections are coming, and let's move on. But I do think it's really important for us to remember what has happened that's brought us here and some things that we're going to need to address going forward, I believe, with new leadership in Raleigh. All right, next slide. All right, many of you might remember this one. This was Executive Order 117, dated March 14th. It really got us all started. It closed the K-12 schools and the churches, which were called basically mass gatherings, and it reduced churches' abilities to meet if they had more than 100 people in that church. Okay, and you can see here the executive orders. All of this is public record. Anybody can pull this at any time. All right, next slide. So Executive Order 121 really kind of took that to the next level. And so on March 27th of 2020, Roy Cooper issued this executive order, and now suddenly our churches were not allowed to meet if they had more than 10 people in their church. So, next slide. This is a violation of our North Carolina State Constitution. For people who do not know, Article 1, Section 13 is very, very clear. And I want to read it to you, and I want to show you why both Executive Order 117 and 121 were completely illegal and unconstitutional, and frankly should have been stopped by the General Assembly. So your Constitution reads, all persons have a natural and inalienable right to worship Almighty God according to the dictates of their own consciences, and no human authority shall in any case whatsoever control or interfere with the rights of conscience. Now, does anybody think an executive order issued by one man should supersede our state constitution? So again, our General Assembly, and I've spoken to many of them, their attitude is, what bad thing has Roy Cooper done to deserve to be impeached? Well, there's many, but I would say first and foremost, it's this one right here. All right, next slide. Okay, so we all remember this. How many business owners do we have here? Okay, love this one. So Executive Order 121, this is the one that closed non-essential businesses. So here we have the state of North Carolina determining which one of your businesses were essential and which ones were non-essential. Again, I can't find any place in the authorities and the powers of our governor where he has the right to close a business he deems as non-essential. But this is what we let stand, and this was, again, Executive Order 121. Okay, next slide. All right, this was a great one. I live here in Johnson County, but I will tell you, I work in downtown Raleigh and work around a lot of restaurants. They were really impacted by this. This was Executive Order 135, and it was dated April 23rd, 2020, and it closed dine-in restaurants. And this really, punished a lot of those small business owners who, were trying to run their business, keep it afloat. All kinds of things were going on. People were concerned about COVID, and now indoor dining is shut down. All right, next slide.
But they were allowed to build little restaurants out on the street.
Yep, exactly. All right. So this one's very important. Okay, and I want to dive into this one quickly. Executive Order 147, dated June 24th of 2020. All right, this was the order for face masks. Just to be clear, okay, at this point in time, this order was illegal. And it was illegal because we had a state law that banned face masks. Okay, we had an anti-face mask law that was still in place when this Executive Order 147 was issued. So, this was, we're going to start putting face masks on your kids. We're going to put them on, in our schools, everybody going to their businesses. So, Executive Order 147. But remember the date. This is June 24th of 2020, because we're going to come back to this. All right, next slide. All right. So, lest we think executive orders about COVID are over, if you go to the next slide, just 2 weeks ago, Roy Cooper issued Executive Order number 253, which was dated March 1st of 2022, and this extended and amended the vaccine verification policy for state employees. Okay? So he's not giving up his executive power privileges under state of emergency. He's still issuing his emergency orders. So as recently as 2 weeks ago, this is still happening. Okay? Next slide. All right. Well, we're told by the General Assembly and many politicians who are running for office, don't worry. Okay? The NCGA, it will stop the executive orders and our rights will be returned and protected. COVID is over. Let's move on. Okay? That's what we're all being told. How many people have heard kind of this message either directly or indirectly? Absolutely. Okay. Next slide. So, HB 264, it was a House bill. It was passed. It was the Emergency Powers Accountability Act. All right, it was going to get Roy Cooper under control. It was passed on 10/21/22. However, next slide. 21, sorry. However, on November the 1st of 2021, Roy Cooper vetoed it. Okay, so HB 264 currently is stalled. All right, so to their credit, General Assembly is going to try again. So next slide. All right. Well, before I move on, let me just talk to you about what 264 intended to do. All right, so the goal here was that with 6 votes of the Council of State, okay, there could be a declaration of emergency powers, a state of emergency, all right? And then that would be required within 48 hours, and that would be basically in place to suspend your constitutional rights for 30 days. Next slide. But this cannot be extended beyond 45 days without approval by the North Carolina General Assembly enacting a law. Well, the problem with this is simple this. You have 6 people on the Council of State. They're going to suspend our constitutional liberties, and then we have a simple majority in the General Assembly that's going to suspend further our constitutional liberties, potentially indefinitely. All right, this I don't agree with. Our constitutional rights should not be suspended by 6 members on Council of State or a majority of the General Assembly. But this was the intent. All right. Next slide. Now, I love this. This is Roy Cooper's actual document that comes with the veto. And he says, an emergency needs decisive, quick, and comprehensive action, not bureaucracy and politics. As if Roy Cooper is above, somehow, bureaucracy and politics. Really? Okay. So, this is his veto of 264. Now, if we go to the next slide, you'll see kind of where we are right now. So we're told, don't worry, 166A, it's been kind of snuck into a Senate spending bill, and it's going to basically, curb or limit these emergency powers under a state of emergency. All right, next slide. Well, the problem with this is, first of all, it doesn't even go into effect until January 1st of 2023. But the problem still is now we've got 5 members of Council of State who can suspend our constitutional liberties, and then that expires in 60 days and is renewed. And again, a majority of the General Assembly can suspend our constitutional rights indefinitely under this measure. Again, I disagree with this. Okay? Yes, sir. We not only have a majority of Republicans in the House and the Senate, they are working very hard to have a supermajority.
So with this majority, they couldn't handle that. We need to wait on the supermajority.
Correct. Oh, it's going to get far worse, so hang in there with me. All right, let's go to the next slide. All right, sorry, we're already there. All right, so remember this one?
They don't have a supermajority, so they can't override Cooper's vetoes.
Correct. But they can stop the spending. So there's many ways, if they truly wanted to, they could get Roy Cooper under control. And obviously they did this, they snuck this into a spending bill. It was a budget bill to modify 166A, which they did. So the bottom line is, if you get creative, you can get a tyrant, and I believe that Roy Cooper is a tyrant. He has exceeded his authority under control. Okay. So remember this one. Again, we're going down a trip down memory lane. All right, remember his executive order, requiring companies of 100 or more to require a COVID-19 vaccine or weekly testing, and it was $14,000 fine per violation. That was going to be the plan. As you know, this got struck down by the Supreme Court, so this did not go into effect, but this was the plan. All right, next slide. This is, of course, Joe Biden. He's waving his fingers at all you unvaccinated folks. You're killing grandma, I think was the speech that we heard over and over. Next slide. Amen. Now, NCGG and 2 citizen moms and many of us, we knew what was coming with the Joe Biden mandate. We knew what California had done with OSHA, and for that reason, there was a meeting set up with Josh Dobson at North Carolina Department of Labor, who controls OSHA in North Carolina, begging for them to issue a new temporary standard that would have blocked the Joe Biden mandate here in the state of North Carolina. That never happened. They were warned in advance, and we asked them, please issue the new temporary standard. Let's get ahead of this. The answer was no. And Josh is a Republican. Next slide. All right, you guys remember this one? All right, we're going to merge gambling, vaccines, and bribery to get you to take this COVID-19 vaccination. All right? So what's really tricky about this, if you drill down deep, how do they know who to pick as the winner? Okay, next slide. They needed a database in order to be able to pick a winner. And that was exactly what was going on. DHHS was building, through their vaccine ID program, a database. And a lot of this, as far as I'm concerned, was a cover. So we're going to pay you to take a vaccine that we're probably already paying Pfizer to give to you using our tax dollars. Next slide. All right, so many of you do or do not know, I don't know, that the Department of Health, Human Services, they have built a vaccine passport ID system here in the state of North Carolina. I know we've heard what's going on in New York, and you can't even get into a restaurant without an ID, but this is in place here, and it's not going away. This will be prepped, and it will be ready to go for the next pandemic to use against North Carolina citizens unless we start dismantling the system. So this is in place. All right, next slide. All right. How many of you have heard of VAERS? Yep. So Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System. How many hearings did any of us hear about with our legislators wanting to look into this vaccine and the potential risks and consequences of it? Zero. Not one. Okay, these are the people who we elect to oversee all kinds of different things. But I heard not one say, maybe we need to have some hearings, maybe we need to bring Pfizer in, maybe we need to see what's in this vaccine that, by the way, we're paying people sometimes $1 million through the lottery system to take. Not a word. Next slide. Okay, this is I pulled this off the webpage 2 days ago. 2 million adverse events. Okay? If we're on Facebook, we just got booted off. I'll tell you that right now, because you're not allowed to report this. All right, almost 25,000 reported vaccine deaths. 135,000 vaccine-reported hospitalizations, and I can go on, and yet nobody at the General Assembly said, maybe we should look into this vaccine. It was rushed into production about what they knew, when they knew it, in terms of the adverse events, and all the people that have actually been harmed by the vaccine. Nothing. Next slide. And I wanted to bring up this slide because, a group hung this up across I-40, and it's a great reminder. Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca, J&J, they're all 100% exempt from liability. So there are vaccines that have been pushed upon our sons and our daughters, and the same people producing the vaccine have no liability of any kind under federal law, 1986. Next slide. All right. So over and over again, you're going to hear Republicans, and I'm running as a Republican, so I'm going to be fully transparent with you. But over and over again, you're going to hear Republicans are going to say that evil Roy Cooper, he's the one that put these masks on our kids. You got a problem. We had a state anti-mask law in place. The Republicans, like this gentleman asked, controlled by the Republicans, they passed Senate Bill 232, which sunset the state's anti-mask law. Okay, so now the illegal Roy Cooper executive order could now be enforced because the law had been sunset. Republicans did that, not Roy Cooper. All right, we need to be very, very clear about this. Okay, and by the way, when they did that, there was no measures whatsoever to put it back into place. And when we've asked those in elected positions about it, they're saying they can't put it back without Roy Cooper signing the bill. So they completely got played. All right, next slide. All right, again, Republicans passed this. All right, next slide. All right, 1043. Love this one. Yep. So now we have the Republican General Assembly, controlled by Republicans, passing a bill, HB 1043, forcing contact tracing, tracking, and testing on North Carolina citizens. This is a perfect case of Roy Cooper and Tim Moore and Phil Berger being in bed together, working against your rights and your constitutional rights. All right? Next slide. Republicans passed this. So this one's on them. All right, HB 558. So we've talked about what they did. Here's a case of what they did not do. We knew NCGG, Two Citizen Moms, and many of us knew this vaccine mandate madness was coming. We went down, we begged, we pleaded with them. Look, let's get legislation in place to prevent the Biden vaccine mandate, which hadn't even been issued yet. We can get ahead of this. You guys got tricked at the Department of Labor. You didn't issue the temporary standard, but we can get 558 passed, and we can protect North Carolina citizens from vaccine mandates. They wouldn't do it. Next slide. It would have preserved freedom, liberty, and thousands of jobs. I know we're past COVID now, so they say, but a lot of people got terminated because they would not take that vaccine. They're not getting their jobs back. Next slide. All right, next slide. Okay, so the remnants of 572, after it was essentially killed by Tim Moore, 558, after it was killed, the remnants were 572. And all it really did was it would say, we're going to stop Roy Cooper from passing an executive order ordering vaccine mandates. That got through the House, but it did not get passed in the Senate. So Phil Berger would not allow this to get passed. All right, next slide. We're almost done. All right, one more, keep going. All right, last one, love this one. Love this one. This is the North Carolina New Green Deal. This got passed, HB 951, passed in the House, passed in the Senate, and signed by Roy Cooper. You guys need to know what's coming your way. If we go to the next slide. All right, HB 951 calls for 70% carbon reduction by 2030 on utility plants. What's that? Yeah, well, yeah. Among other, yes, that's right. So 70% carbon reduction by 2030. Next slide. This is carbon neutral by 2050 is going to be required by this HB 951. Next slide. All right. It also mandates that the procurement of solar energy, 2,660 megawatts. They've got to purchase across the state and get that installed. Clearly, this is leaning heavily towards solar energy. I personally think we need energy of all kinds, whatever it takes to get it done, reduce costs, make things competitive, make things fair. Let's not pick a winner. All right, next slide. All right, so I think we need new leadership in Raleigh. I don't know about you.